It isn't just the Americans, but the world that is watching what happens in the US midterms with bated breath. I'm Barkha, that's Yo with the Mojo story. On our special broadcast today, we are doing a deep dive into what message we can draw so far from what we know about the US midterm elections. The big picture is quite simply this: Joe Biden appears to have dodged a red wave that had been forecast in several of the polls. In fact, in the critical state of Pennsylvania, the Democrats have even managed to flip a color and take Pennsylvania back for the Blues. The question, though, is does the United States of America remain as divided as ever before? And what do these numbers suggest for Trump's teaser? He suggested a big announcement on the 15th of this month, and most believe that he was going to announce that he was planning to run for president again. The polarization of the United States of America is emblematic of the polarization in many other parts of the world, including our own in India. Looking at the message, and remember, there are several close contests. It could be many days before we have an absolutely clear picture, but there are some big takeaways. So looking at the big picture, so far, let's introduce our guest today. We're very pleased to have three very, very distinguished voices with us. Up front, Joe Walsh, former presidential candidate, used to be a Republican, but if you just take a cursory glance at his Twitter feed, you'll get a sense of how much he dislikes Trump today and the shape and form the Republicans are taking today. Good to see you, Joe. Also joining us is Minnie Timmaraju. Minnie has, in her previous avatar, of course, worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign, so it's good to see you, Minnie. Also joining us from the Washington Post, my colleague Christian Caryl, Global Opinions editor at the Post, and also great to see Jonah Blank. Jonah Blank is with the National University of, or has been with the National University of Singapore, but in his past has also worked with Joe Biden. So really a very, very exciting panel. And I'll start with you, Joe. I was closely following your Twitter thread, and you said, if the Republicans win tomorrow or win big tomorrow, it may mean A, B, or C, mostly dire forecasts. Are you heaving a sigh of relief that no matter what happens, and many of the contests are really tight even now, and the Republicans could take control of the House with a slender majority, it looks like the red wave that was being forecast in so many of the polls has been dodged by Biden and the Democrats? Your take?
Barkha, good to be with you. I often think that relief can be a much more satisfying emotion than joy. And yes, myself and a lot of people in America, I think, are breathing a big sigh of relief this morning. Look, this country is divided. Joe Biden and the Democrats, not knowing the final results, really defied history last night. It looks like the Republicans will probably have a small majority in the House. The Democrats look to hold on to the Senate. And my biggest takeaway is that it looks like the American people actually do care a lot more about their democracy than many experts believed.
That's very interesting because Joe, a number, and as we see these big trends on our screen, a number of the polls prior to the results suggested that inflation was the biggest sort of factor. Although it was repeatedly said that it was democracy on the ballot, what you're actually saying is that preserving democracy was an electoral issue. It looks like from these results that it wasn't an airy-fairy slogan; it was an actual issue for the way people have voted, Joe.
I think it was there. Look, I'm not going to deny the importance of inflation and crime and all the rest, but I think it was there. And when you have one of our two major political parties that has been completely overtaken by election denialism, not even respecting the results of an election, I think a lot of Americans, more than people thought, went to the polls yesterday and said, we can't allow this. That's my hope.
And of course, the irony, Christian, if I can get you in, the irony, of course, is that many of the election deniers have, in fact, won on the same process. And it would be curious to see if they now believe in that process. But, the polarization in the United States, I'm here on the East Coast right now for a few weeks, and it is a country divided like I have never seen before. And these results, these numbers probably continue to split the US down the middle. To that extent, the significance of these numbers as we know them this morning, Christian?
Well, I think the real significance for me is that we really have seen a lot of moderates in the political landscape expressing their desire for a bit more balance in the middle. It's very striking that a number of the candidates that Trump endorsed did not win in some of these marquee races. And Trump even felt compelled to issue a statement reminding people that many of his endorsements had won their primary contests, right? It seemed a little unnecessary, but one has the sense that he's trying to remind his own people that he can be a force, because so far he hasn't really proven to be an unstoppable force. And that's really a remarkable message coming out of this election.
Yeah, and that is interesting that you're actually saying that there could be a middle, a center that is emerging, and that is what the numbers suggest, Christian? An ideological center?
I would certainly like to hope that. A lot of us here have been watching very closely the races in the state of Virginia, which is right here next to Washington, D.C., obviously. And it was quite interesting to see that one leading Democratic candidate was defeated by a Republican, but another very prominent moderate Democrat, Abigail Spanberger, former CIA agent, won quite convincingly, and a lot of people were expecting her to lose. And that was a kind of a test case for a lot of people, because she represents a very what we now call purple district outside of Washington, D.C. She's by no means a pronounced progressive. She's always been very outspoken in her support of the president and in support of very moderate policies. And for a lot of people like me who would like to see a revitalized center in this country, it was heartening to see her win. I mean, I don't want to overdo it. I'm sure Joe feels the same way. We don't have all the results yet, but some of these bellwether races have sent us at least a somewhat more reassuring message.
Joe, do you want to just jump in briefly before I go to Jonah and Minnie on the idea that the moderates are asserting themselves, especially in the age of Donald Trump? It looked like one extremity was setting off another extremity. As a former Republican, someone who's run for office, how do you see this? Do you agree with Christian that we do actually see a kind of space or a kind of revival of the center of the moderates? Joe? Give me a second. Let me just unmute you.
I will say this. The Republican Party is, my former party is what it is now. And Trump/Trumpism has taken over that party. I don't believe a conservative like me or Liz Cheney will ever be welcome back in that party. But I think the rest of America believes in democracy. And I think we'll always outnumber this Republican Party that will keep shrinking.
So that's interesting. You actually think that there will be no space for people like yourselves, moderates like yourself, in the Republican Party. Jonah, Biden was described as too weak, too old to take on Trumpism. And, it's very interesting. Trumpism is a phenomena by itself. For our audience outside of the United States of America, it's also important to put into context that historically, it is the opposition that takes the midterms, right? And therefore, if the Republicans do not actually win significantly, not just would Biden have managed to stave off that Trumpism, he would be bucking the trend, right? Jonah, your thoughts?
Yes, Barkha, you're absolutely right. In America, it's completely the norm, the historical norm for the party out of power to pick up typically several dozen seats in the House and several seats in the Senate in midterm elections. The reason for this is that during presidential elections, a lot of voters come out who don't come out in the off years. And then they typically don't come out 2 years later. So you're left with sort of the opposition party being angry and the true believers staying home. So no matter what happens, whether it is a narrow win for the Republicans or a narrow win for the Democrats, Joe Biden and the Democrats will certainly have bucked the historical trend and certainly outperformed historical norms.
And what does that say for 2024? At some point, that's the elephant in the room. We had Donald Trump, Jonah, tantalizingly talking about a big announcement on the 15th. His supporters thought that means another bid for office, and that could still happen. But will sort of the absence of a red wave make him think again, you think?
No, absolutely not. He will certainly run for president in 2024 and will certainly be the cheerleader for the destruction of democracy. Let's look at the big picture. Democrats have won the popular election in the popular vote in every presidential election except for 2004, ever since George H.W. Bush. And that's likely to continue far into the future. And yet it may not matter, because the Republican strategy right now is explicitly, not even hidden, to be moving towards what they call a constitutional republic rather than a democracy. And that is something that would not have happened 4 years ago, 8 years ago. Right now, that's the world we're living in, where one of the two parties has essentially rejected democracy.
Those are strong words, and actually they're asserting themselves through the process of the same democracy. But who can forget the images of the Capitol Hill sort of violence? And I think we have those pictures to remind our global audience that the world's largest democracy that actually has gone to war supposedly to preserve democracy in other countries, these were the images, and this was perhaps a turning point, those televised public hearings of actually what went down. Nancy Pelosi, Mike Pence, the vice president of the United States of America, literally in the line of fire. That is something, America's tryst with its own democracy. Minnie, you've been in this space before. You've had hopes, and then you've had those hopes crash. You do remember the Hillary campaign. What does this mean today for America's fight for the democracy? Again and again, we've had Biden, Obama, literally every leader on the Dem side saying this midterm isn't routine. It is about saving America's democracy. Has America's democracy been saved then?
We're gonna be on a long path to save the democracy. We've got some really significant challenges with voting rights, and if we don't win 2 more seats and abolish the filibuster and hold the House, we can't really take the actions we need in Congress. But I got to take a step back and say, I run one of the largest pro-choice reproductive freedom organizations in the country. And I'm a little disappointed that no one's given credit where credit is due.
I was going to ask you, how much of an issue has that been? How much of an issue?
Number one, the number of ridiculous conversations I've had in the last couple of weeks with pundits and pollsters saying, is it abortion or the economy? Guess what? American voters, particularly women and young voters, are more sophisticated than that. They understand that reproductive freedom is an economic issue. The decision to when, if, and how to have a family is one of the most profound decisions. And this is the first election we've had since a fundamental freedom was taken away from the American people. So thank you, women voters. Thank you, young voters. You're welcome. We've done extensive work with our partners at Emily's List of Planned Parenthood over the last year since the Dobbs decision. You cannot underestimate the power of these voters and this issue in this election. And we've said it before, and I'll say it again, abortion access and the issue of abortion is a fundamental step towards saving our democracy. And the democracy challenges and the reproductive freedom challenges are intertwined, because 8 out of 10 Americans, including many Republicans and independents, folks like Abigail Spanberger, she ran on abortion. She led on abortion, and that's how she won an incredibly tough district. We won ballot initiatives last night in Montana, in Kentucky. So I just hope folks understand the significance of the gender gap in this election and give respect to these voters finally.
And I have to thank you for raising it. It was going to be my next question, because a lot of the punditry I hear here from American friends, Minnie, actually suggested that maybe that center stage of abortion rights as an issue, reproductive rights as an issue, peaked too early. That was the punditry, and the focus had shifted to inflation and the price of gas, as if these are two mutually exclusive ideas. So I just want you to come in on actually doubling down on the fact that this is an election that has taken place. And again, I'm contextualizing this for our audience outside the United States of America. In countries like India, we take the right to reproductive autonomy for granted. Right. It's actually one of the few rights that institutionally works and has just been liberalized by our Supreme Court, right? So I want you to stress or talk a little bit about the mood among women voters. It's difficult to contextualize, because do remember that many women voters did vote for Trump in the last election. So I want you to talk a little bit about the female vote.
It's funny, Barkha, because when I first started working in reproductive rights, all my family in India were like, why do you have a job? Like, that's not a fundamental right in the United States. Look, women voters, in 2016, you were correct. We lost white women. But we won every other demographic, including non-college white women. I mean, we lost non-college white women. We won college-educated white women, suburban white women, and that's going to be a critical focus, I think, going into 2024. So the coalition of women voters. I'll tell you why I wasn't worried about the pundits. It's because we ran a very aggressive get out the vote field operation. What that means for your viewers in India, we were knocking on doors, making phone calls, talking directly to voters. And we saw the spike in the gender gap and the youth vote gap in early vote registration and vote by mail and early vote weeks before everybody else did, along with several of our really smart colleagues. And we knew we had the numbers if we could motivate them to turn out, which is the challenge in a midterm election because there's no big marquee presidential contest leading the pack. Women voters are extremely angry. They're deeply frustrated. They completely understand the connection between the economy, democracy, and reproductive freedom, and they showed their strength. And we're going to keep investing and mobilizing those women. And women candidates did very well last night.
Well, good on you. I think it's really stirring to see, in a way, the fight. That is often taken to the streets. It isn't just left to armchair commentary, and I think that's what matters: mass mobilization. But there is counter mass mobilization, Joe. And you said people like yourselves, people like Liz Cheney, would have no place in the age of Trump in the neo-Republican, post-Trump Republican Party. Jonah says he is definitely going to run. No matter which way the numbers finally stack up, he's going to run. What does that mean for the future of America, the future of politics, and the future of your erstwhile party, Joe?
Again, Barkha, I'm a dark Irishman. I think that America is in for a long, ugly, bumpy ride. I'm not a historian, but I don't think we've been this divided as a country since just before the Civil War. I hear what Minnie says, and I think that's one of the secret ingredients of this year, is that a lot of women and a lot of young people registered and voted that the polls did not pick up. One of America's two major political parties has given up on democracy. I mean, think about that. One of our two major political parties, my former political party, but it's on that road. It's not going to change. We think Donald Trump had a bad night last night. Bull, that doesn't matter. Donald Trump can announce in a week, and he will be the odds-on favorite to be the nominee of that party. That's not going to change. America's in trouble.
Tell me why. Tell me why your former party is so attached to the idea of Trump, even after his own vice president, Mike Pence, had to distance himself from Trump and in the end follow institutions and protocols and rules. Why? Why do you think?
Yeah, Barkha, think about that. 22 months ago, Donald Trump led a violent attempt to overthrow an American election. And yet, in a normal, healthy party, that man would be a pariah. He would have been driven out of the party, but he's still the leader because the party's a cult. The party, my former party, mainly is made up of older white men and older white women who believe they've been beaten down for years and this country is changing too fast. Donald Trump came along 5 years ago and said, I'll stop that. And they clung to him. It is a cult. And I don't see them unclinging themselves ever.
Christian, it's fascinating because it has mirrors in different shades when you look at the rise of populist politics. Actually, globally, there is always a cult of personality at the center. There is a suggestion that the dominant community or the community considered to be the original community of a country is somehow under siege. And I think that's what Joe references here. My question is, if Trump is definitely going to run, is Biden, you think, going to continue to be the face of the Dems?
Well, that's a very good question. I completely agree with what Joe just said. I actually do think that Trump had a bit of a bad night last night, but I don't think that solves any of these longer term problems. I don't think it prevents Trump from running again. I'm convinced he's going to run again, and I think he might actually have a good chance of winning another victory, which of course would be very, very problematic for the future of American democracy. Whether Biden runs again is a bit of a question at the moment. I think he probably will. If he does, he will be far and away one of the oldest people to run for the office, and his age has unquestionably been an issue. I think Democrats may be facing some tough choices on the road ahead. I'm almost sure he will run again, but that comes with its own issues. I mean, Trump
Yeah.
is also, we should also note, Trump is also quite elderly, right?
This is true. This is true. I think that's a good point to remember, that we always talk of Biden as this old politician, and we keep forgetting that it's not exactly like Trump is a spring chicken. And it's not that I'm being ageist. I'm just saying I hear this all the time, traveling through the United States of America. Oh, Biden's so old. Biden's so old. And nobody actually on the Trump base says Trump is so old. So that's actually what I was pointing out. So thanks for reminding us of Trump's age. Jonah, do you share Joe's cynicism that Trump is, he's not going to say, I had one bad night and so anything changes. In fact, things might even get uglier because, when the base is defeated, you've got to rev it up. So we actually don't know what he might do next.
Yes, absolutely. And I completely agree with Joe about what's at the heart of this. I'm an anthropologist by training. And what we're really seeing, in my view, is tribalism, basically of folks who look like me. White males have had all of the goodies of society for all of American history up until the time when the Trump affiliates wanted to take us back to. And now white men essentially have gone from having 100% of society's benefits to having maybe 70%. And they represent only something like 40% of the country. And this is at the heart, in my view, of what is driving Trump and MAGA. How do you get out of this? Sadly, it's not an easy pathway. The good news, I would say, is that, again, putting on my anthropologist hat, tribes do change. Tribes do go up and down throughout all of history, throughout every society. When I talk about tribalism, I'm not talking about something that happens in far off countries or in a rainforest somewhere. Every society has its own tribes, its own ascriptive, to use anthropological terminology, groupings. And I think we as Americans like to believe that we are different in that. We like to believe our founding rhetoric without looking at the fact that our founding rhetoric really obscures the fact that all of the founders belong to one tribe who now are really being asked to share power and will eventually be forced to. I'd just also like to point out what Minnie said. She's absolutely right that if democracy is going to be saved, it will be saved by American women, and I would say by people of color, because right now, that is the coalition that is, along with college-educated white men and some non-college educated, but they're the ones who are going to save democracy if American democracy is going to be saved.
That's a great point there. Two great points. One, if American democracy is going to be saved, it's women and people of color at the front line of that fight, but also the idea of American exceptionalism, which is so defined the self-image of the world's arguably still the most powerful, influential country, today under challenge by its own people. Minnie, this takes me to a question that I know you and I care strongly about. I think, Indians, as we said in the beginning, befuddled about abortion, but also befuddled about the fact that this country has still not had a woman lead it. There are many institutional inequalities between men and women in India, but we've had a woman prime minister. Do you believe that, given the role that women have played at the heart of this midterm, that we will now see a kind of push for female leadership at the very top, or am I being over optimistic here?
No, and I first of all, I just need to say congrats to my good friend Aruna Miller, who just pulled off a historic first right here where I live in Maryland. Fantastic. So that was a great shot. Indian Americans largely identify as Democrats in this country, just FYI, and are very, very clear on fundamentals of democracy, reproductive freedom. That's important for your audience to understand. I will say Kamala Harris we claim her, her family is from South India, and she's been really, really aggressive about courting our community. And also she's been leading the way on outreach for this administration around reproductive freedom and access. and frankly, I think was pivotal in getting Joe Biden to focus so much on restoring Roe v. Wade. But to your fundamental question, absolutely, we saw some big stars emerge last night. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor in Michigan, is a rock star. She led her party in her state up and down the ticket. They just flipped the legislature. It's unbelievable. It's a purple state. It's a tough state. It's one we lost. And Gretchen is really poised to have a bright future and is already being talked about as a presidential candidate. But I will say, don't write off Joe Biden yet. What happened last night is historic. Everyone had written him off. Everyone had written off the Democrats last night. He led our party to something that nobody expected. He continues to defy the odds. And, you know, the contrast between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is really interesting, right? Yes, he might be older, but he's a fundamentally decent person, the empathizer in chief. And Americans crave that. The more crazy and extremist the GOP gets, folks like Joe Biden become much more appealing to Americans.
Very interesting. And as I said, he's bucking the trend here, not just sort of holding on, but also bucking the historic trend of the midterms going to the opposition. Joe, I'm going to give you the last word. I know we're almost out of time. Can we unmute Joe? Joe, go for it.
Yeah, just one word of caution, and I agree with what Minnie and everybody has said. We don't know what's going to happen yet. We don't know the results. There's still a good chance Republicans will take back the House and take back the Senate. And whether they take back the House by 4 seats or 20 seats, they'll control the House. So Democrats did defy history last night, but Republicans could still win. The second point I'd make is America's ready for a female president, but I would remind everybody, and she's not my cup of tea, there's a decent chance Carrie Lake could be elected governor of Arizona. And if she wins, she is a rock star in the Republican Party. That's not my kind of female president, but don't be surprised if she wins that she's the next it thing.
I mean, Joe, I saw a video of her trying to tell media that she was going to teach journalists yet how to be journalists. So it is frightening that this could happen. That cautionary note, anybody disagree that it isn't over yet? Minnie feels, Biden's already put his stamp on history, but I think that's an important point from Joe. Christian, any last thoughts before we close? Sorry, Minnie, were you wanting to say something?
Yes,
yeah. Okay, go for it.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with Joe. We have a lot of big fights left. The control of the Senate is key, but the same instincts that told us we were going to have these big wins in places like Montana and Kentucky are bearing out already in the early vote and the early indications of places like Nevada and Arizona. And Katie Hobbs is coming in from behind in Arizona. I think we're going to have a fundamental victory of decency over extremism in the coming days and weeks.
Hey, Barkha, I need to speak with Minnie every day because she will balance my pessimism. Thank you, Minnie. I mean that.
Just talk to voters. Yeah. You just don't look at the polls. Talk to voters. That's what I tell everybody.
No, but I think there's an important caution in Joe's closing comment that there may not have been a wave, but if the Republicans do take control of the House and the Senate, that could change everything, including Minnie talking about a national ban on abortion, right? Totally. So we've got to remember that the stakes for the American people are very high, and arguably for the world. For globally, for people who look towards the United States of America as a shining light. I'm going to close, but I'm going to just allow Jonah and Christian some 30 seconds for last thoughts. Christian, go ahead.
I'm somewhat heartened by the results, but I'm still very worried about the presidential.
Yeah, I think that's the reality check. Jonah?
Yes, I'm cheered by Minnie's optimism. I feel better today than I did yesterday, but I feel I share Joe's profound pessimism about the course we're on. We are in deep, deep trouble, and it goes beyond politics to society. This really is, America has got to, and people who look like me have got to move to the future if we are going to break out of this.
Well, thank you, Joe, Christian, Jonah, and Minnie. I can't put any bets on which way it's going to end. I'm an outsider looking at this, but this is the country where I grew up. This is the country where I studied. I write for the Post. I think all of us, no matter where we come from, are invested in the future of the United States of America. So this isn't about America alone. And I think that's what's interesting for the American people to realize, that this is really, whatever happens here is a global democracy debate. Thank you very much, everybody. We hope to have you back as things go along and we have a clearer picture. Really enjoyed talking to you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.